I've seen it happen way too often. You grab a budget gaming laptop because the price looks good, only to end up swapping it out after a month because the frame can't keep up with the heat, the screen flickers, or you simply can't run the newest titles at the settings you'd expected. That's why I wanted to take a closer look at the new Razer Blade 16 before I even thought about throwing money at it. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In the first few minutes of my research, the thing that kept coming up was the same question people keep asking: is this ultra-thin monster a smarter buy, or is it just a flashy billboard for the latest specs? When you start comparing laptops in the premium segment, the conversation quickly shifts from raw numbers to real-world trade-offs. The Blade 16 is marketed as a 14.9mm slim chassis that still packs an RTX 5090, a 64GB DDR5X memory suite, and a 2TB SSD. That sounds like a lot of power crammed into a notebook that could sit on a cafe table, but the true test is how that power translates into everyday gaming and multitasking, and whether the engineering choices behind the thinness actually serve you or just make you compromise elsewhere. First off, the display is probably the most immediate proof point for why this laptop feels different. A 16-inch QHD Plus OLED panel with a 240Hz refresh rate and 0.2 milliseconds response time is a rare combination at this size. In practice, that means competitive shooters feel buttery smooth, and the colors pop in narrative-driven games like Starfield or Horizon Forbidden West without the typical sRGB washed-out look you find on cheaper panels. I tested a couple of modern titles at native 1440p, and the frame rate stayed comfortably above 120 frames per second on medium-high settings, which is more than enough to hit that 240Hz ceiling if you have a high refresh monitor. For creators who also need color accuracy for video editing, the OLED's deep blacks and high contrast ratio are a real advantage, but you do have to watch out for the occasional burn-in risk if you leave static UI elements on for extended periods. That's a hidden trade-off you won't see on a standard LCD. The CPU side of things is an 13th Gen Intel processor, and the headline is that it can juggle AAA games while you stream or run demanding background apps. In real-world usage, I opened a game, launched Discord, a web browser with multiple tabs, and ran OBS for streaming. The performance stayed solid, no noticeable stutter, and the game never dipped below 60 frames per second on high settings. That's the kind of multitasking scenario many gaming laptop reviewers gloss over, but it's exactly what a lot of gamers do when they're trying to build a community. The key here is the 64GB of LPDDR5X memory, which means the system never has to start swapping to the SSD under these loads. If you're someone who does heavy RAM-intensive work like 3D rendering, large-scale video editing, or running virtual machines, this extra memory is a genuine practical benefit rather than just a spec sheet brag. Now, the thing that made many skeptics raise an eyebrow is the vapor chamber cooling system. In theory, pushing a high-end GPU like the RTX 5090 through a thin body without overheating is a tall order. The Blade 16 uses a vapor chamber design that spreads heat more evenly across the base, and I monitored temperatures while running a benchmark loop for about an hour. The GPU peaked at roughly 85 C, and the CPU hovered around 78 C. Those numbers are respectable for a laptop this thin, and the fan noise stayed in the 4550 dB range, loud enough to notice, but not so intrusive that you can't have a conversation. That said, if you plan to push the laptop to its limits for marathon sessions, say, a 4-hour gaming marathon with maxed out ray tracing, you'll start to feel the heat on the chassis after the first hour or so, which can get uncomfortable on your lap or thighs. It's a subtle compromise. You gain portability, but you lose a bit of cool comfort compared to a bulkier workstation-class laptop. Storage and speed are another area where the Blade 16 shines without being overly hyped. A 2TB NVMe SSD with PCIe 4.0 lanes means your game load times are basically instantaneous, think under a second for most modern titles. If you're the type who keeps a massive library of games, the capacity isn't just a nice-to-have, it removes the need for an external drive, which in turn keeps you from dealing with the extra latency or the hassle of plugging in another SSD when you travel. The 9600 MHz memory bandwidth also translates into snappy system responsiveness when you're scrubbing through large video files or loading complex 3D scenes. One practical concern that often gets missed in the hype is the port selection. Because the Blade 16 sticks to the ultra-thin philosophy, you get a decent mix of Thunderbolt 4, HDMI 2.1, and a USB-C 3.2 slot, but you lose a few legacy ports that some creators still rely on, like a full-size SD card slot or a dedicated Ethernet jack. If you're accustomed to plugging